An empire doesn't just swap leaders like clothes, or does it? In just 20 years, 7 different men claimed the throne, leaving historians baffled. How did the world's most complex bureaucracy survive a new civil war every 30 months, discover the hidden logistical machinery that kept an empire from total collapse? In 695, the danger is not foreign, it's internal and it's intimate. A reigning emperor is dragged into a guarded space where decisions become irreversible. Justinian II is seized, publicly humiliated, and mutilated, his nose cut off, because his enemies need more than a resignation. They need a physical fact that breaks the spell of imperial invincibility. A deposed emperor can return. A marked body is supposed to make return unimaginable. The risk is legitimacy itself. If an emperor can be unmade, then any commander with troops can start calculating. The structural constraint is that Byzantium has no clean constitutional transfer, only recognition, oaths, and force. The consequence is immediate. The throne turns from inheritance into a prize auctioned by soldiers. The conventional explanation is that the empire nearly collapses because ambitious men keep stealing the crown. But the deeper driver is logistical. The state is a distribution machine. Whoever controls the pay chests, the grain routes, and the seals that authorize movement controls what the army eats and what the cities believe. Depose the emperor, and the question becomes brutally practical. Do the provincial tax streams still flow into Constantinople, and do the units still receive pay on schedule? Once the flow stutters, loyalty becomes short-term, and every commander begins to live month to month. Leontios, the new emperor, inherits that problem immediately. He has to prove he can feed the capital and pay the themes, the provincial field armies without the dynastic aura that used to buy time. In a tense council where men watch one another's hands as closely as their faces, Leontios is forced into a decision: pursue a decisive victory against the Umayyads, to manufacture legitimacy or conserve resources to keep the internal system intact. The structural force limiting him is geography and time. The empire's grain and tax schedule is seasonal. Ships and caravans do not move on command. Leontios chooses the visible gamble. He pushes toward North Africa, trying to reclaim Carthage and show that the state still expands. Then the empire's logistics rebel. In 698, the expedition fails. Carthage is lost. The fleet, men who have seen the cost of defeat and fear being blamed for it, sails back toward the capital, not as a tool but as a threat. A commander named Opsimar is proclaimed emperor aboard ship. The physical anchor is decisive, a proclamation on a warship deck surrounded by armed men, where dissent is not debated but silenced. The risk for the fleet is execution for failure. The risk for the capital is starvation and blockade if the fleet turns hostile. The structural constraint is that Constantinople is a city that lives on controlled maritime arteries. Naval loyalty is not optional. Leontios tries to hold power with what every threatened emperor reaches for first: punishment as a signal. But coercion requires reliable hands, and the men who would enforce it are watching the harbor. When the fleet reaches Constantinople, the city's defenses are strong, yet the political defenses are weak. Opsimar, now Tiberius III, takes the throne. Leontios is mutilated in turn. The message is meant to stabilize the system by terrorizing rivals, but it has the opposite effect. Each mutilation teaches ambitious men that the game has only one rule: win completely or be physically erased. That makes compromise impossible. Tiberius III faces a narrower set of choices than the title suggests. He must keep the thematic armies paid, especially in Anatolia, where Umayyad raids are constant, and where unpaid soldiers simply become bandits with uniforms. He also must keep the grain and customs revenues moving through officials who have served 3 emperors in 3 years and are learning a dangerous lesson. Survival comes from flexibility, not loyalty. In an office where lead seals are pressed into wax to authorize shipments, continuity is maintained, not by devotion to a ruler, but by scribes, collectors, and quartermasters who need the system to keep functioning so they can keep eating. The empire survives because mid-level administrators continue the routines even when the throne becomes unstable. That routine is exactly what the exiled Justinian II understands when he becomes a ghost with a plan. Mutilated and sent away, he does not return by inspiring a moral revival. He returns by assembling logistics and exile, a coalition, money, and access. He negotiates with the Bulgar Khanterval, trading promises, titles, gold, perhaps territory, for the one asset that still terrifies Constantinople, an army appearing at the walls unexpectedly. The sources argue over details because propaganda and humiliation warp the record, but the structural reality is clear enough. Justinian has nothing inside the bureaucracy. He must import force from outside it. In 705, Justinian II reaches Constantinople and does not win by storming it in a glorious assault. He wins by exploiting the city's vulnerability to infiltration and internal exhaustion. A small party enters, the gates are opened, and suddenly the capital must decide in hours whether to resist and risk massacre or submit and hope the returning emperor wants order more than revenge. The physical anchor is a guarded room where oaths are forced quickly. Officials swearing not because they believe, but because they are calculating what keeps them alive until morning. Justinian takes the throne back. The common story calls what follows a reign of terror, as if it's only personal cruelty, but it is also logistical self-sabotage. Justinian is threatened by every officer who served his usurpers. He risks losing the throne again the moment a commander decides the cost is worth it, so he chooses purges. In chambers where sealed lists are opened and names read aloud, he executes and exiles men who know how to run fleets, collect taxes, and supply armies. The structural force limiting him is distrust. He cannot rebuild legitimacy quickly, and he cannot watch every garrison. He tries to solve a systemic problem with personal violence. The consequence is that competence drains away the state's professional memory, the unwritten knowledge of who can be bribed, which road can move wagons in spring mud, which harbor can refit a squadron fast, gets destroyed alongside enemies. The provinces feel this first governors and strategoi in the themes, watch the capital devour its own officers and begin to hedge. The tax grid, village assessments, collection schedules, transport contracts depends on confidence that Constantinople will still exist, still honor receipts, still pay soldiers who escort shipments. When emperors die quickly, receipts lose meaning. A collector who sends revenue to the capital risks being accused by the next regime of funding its enemy. The safer choice becomes keeping money local, paying local troops, and delaying remittances until the political weather clears. That is not rebellion by ideology, it's insurance by arithmetic. In 701 the system breaks again. Justinian II faces revolts and external pressure. When a new uprising crystallizes, he cannot rely on the same officer class he has been executing. He is overthrown and killed. The dynastic link that once anchored loyalty is now not merely cut, it is discredited. Philippikos Bardanis takes the throne, and immediately feels the same threat every new emperor feels. The army might accept him today and replace him tomorrow. He tries to buy support by shifting religious policy, moving against the memory of the Sixth Ecumenical Council's condemnation of monothelitism, because doctrine is not abstract here. It's a way to recruit networks of bishops and monasteries, to gain denunciations from pulpits that can delegitimize rivals, but doctrine can't move grain. It can't repair fortifications. The structural constraint is that the Umayyad Caliphate is not pausing while Constantinople debates formulas. Philippikos is blinded in 713 in a palace coup. Again, the physical mutilation is a political instrument. A blind man cannot lead troops, cannot preside as a symbol of divine favor. Anastasios too replaces him and tries to reverse the direction, away from palace ideology and back to war preparation. Anastasios looks at the maps and the ledgers and sees a state that is running on arrears. Ships need crews, crews need pay. Pay needs taxes, taxes need a predictable authority, so he makes the decision that seems rational and becomes fatal. He pushes to discipline the fleet and prepare defenses, trying to bind the military back to the center. The fleet responds the way the fleet has learned to respond by choosing its own emperor. In 715, sailors and marines, fearing punishment and distrusting the capital, rise and elevate Theodosius III, a man who is not a towering general, but a compromised someone the factions think they can control. The physical anchor is the harbor again, where the empire's most mobile coercive force becomes a political electorate with weapons. The consequence is that the center cannot impose policy on the very tool needed to defend it. Now the empire's most dangerous vulnerability becomes visible: Anatolia. The thematic armies there are the wall between Constantinople and the Umayyad armies assembling for a major strike. But those armies are also political actors. They have been paid inconsistently, commanded by men who can expect purge or promotion depending on palace rumor, and asked to fight while the capital swaps rulers. The structural constraint is that the themes were designed to be self-sustaining military districts, brilliant for survival, disastrous for central control during succession crises. The more the center weakens, the more the themes become mini-states with their own fiscal logic. This is where the Seven Emperors story becomes less like chaos and more like a test of an invisible machine. In the capital, clerks still calculate rations. In storehouses, grain is still measured because a city that stops measuring starves quickly. In the mint, coins still have to be struck because soldiers do not accept promises. In provincial towns, local elites still arbitrate disputes and keep roads passable because collapse would destroy their own wealth first. The empire survives not because the emperors are strong, but because too many people are trapped inside the system to let it die. Yet that same system is now training everyone to expect betrayal. By 717, the final forced decision arrives. Theodosius III cannot command the themes, cannot control the fleet reliably, and cannot convince provinces to empty their treasuries for a throne that might not last the year. In Anatolia, a commander named Leo, later called the Isaurian, moves with the one asset that still matters: a coherent army that believes its survival depends on decisive action. Leo does not simply march. He negotiates, isolates rivals, and demands recognition before he reaches the capital, because taking Constantinople is easier than keeping it. The physical anchor is a guarded negotiation where envoys trade oaths and hostages, each side calculating whether surrender today prevents massacre tomorrow. Leo takes the throne as the Umayyads launch what becomes the Great Arab Siege of Constantinople, beginning in 717 and stretching into 718. This is not a heroic coincidence, it's the bill coming due. For 20 years, the empire has been consuming its administrative competence, converting tax revenue into bribes, and using mutilation to replace institutional trust. Now, the siege tests whether anything functional remains. Preparing the capital means chain of command, discipline at the walls, stockpiles in controlled storehouses, and naval coordination to keep supply lines open through the Bosporus. It means the city's defenders must believe that if they hold, they won't be punished by the next emperor for having served the wrong one. Leo's first victory is not against the besiegers, it's against the internal expectation of immediate betrayal. The sources celebrate Greek fire walls and winter famine in the enemy camp, and those things matter. But the deeper lesson of the 20 years' anarchy is structural. The empire learns to treat the throne less as a sacred inheritance and more as a command post that must be welded to the army and the fiscal system. After the crisis, behavior changes. Loyalty becomes more explicitly transactional, managed through the themes and through tighter control of appointments. The capital becomes more suspicious of autonomous fleets. Emperors become less tolerant of rival power centers, not only from paranoia, but from learned experience. Any independent logistics node, an army with its own pay stream, a fleet with its own political agenda, is a future usurpation waiting for a bad year. The 7 emperors in 2 decades look, at first, like madness. But the instability is not random. It is the product of a bureaucracy and a military designed for survival under pressure, then pushed past the point where legitimacy can buffer shortages and defeats. Each coup teaches the next faction what signals work: a mutilated rival, a forced oath, a proclamation at the harbor, a purge list opened in private, and under all of it, the same machinery keeps turning: coins, grain, seals, schedules, because millions of lives depend on it. The empire doesn't survive because it is calm. It survives because, even at its most chaotic, it can still move food, pay soldiers, and manufacture recognition fast enough to fight off extinction. When that becomes the definition of rulership, the Byzantine state that emerges is harder, more militarized, and less forgiving. Built not for expansion, but for the next emergency, it now expects. Welcome to the Epic History Tales channel. Subscribe to the channel if you want to watch the similar video